What is up, and welcome to another edition of the Bruin Bible. Will Decker, your host. Make sure you guys are liking and subscribing the podcast. We are brought to you guys today by our advertisers. Our advertisers are Bell to Bell Fitness, Shator, a realtor out in Arizona, former Bruin alum, and my main man Howard Cheng, a realtor right here in Los Angeles. Let's go through them, guys. Bell to Bell Fitness is a boxing gym on the West Coast used by their FIT acronym, Fight Inspired Training. My main man, Tony Gonzalez, was the boxing coach for UCLA for over 10 years. He has built this gym on the West Side to learn how to boxing, stay in shape, and get you all the essentials you need to become somebody that is obsessed with boxing and fitness. Make sure to check it out. Go into Bell to Bell Fitness and say you heard about it from the Bruin Bible, and you're going to get a free session with Tony Gonzalez. So make sure to check that out. Shator, my main man. Shator is a licensed real estate agent in Arizona and a lifelong Bruin. He's a current Wooden Athletic Fund donor and football season ticket holder. When not selling houses or going to UCLA games, he loves to travel the country, checking out different arenas, ballparks, and stadiums. If you're looking to make the move to Arizona or know someone who is, please reach out to our loyal friend, Mr. Shator. His phone number is 602-487-3975. Once again, his number is 602-487-3975. Make sure to check that out. And then the local realtor we got out here, Howard Cheng. Howard Cheng is a local realtor with the Serene Team at eXp Realty. Their team has an office right here in Culver City, though they help clients buy and sell homes all over the LA County and the surrounding areas. Howard and his team do a ton of business and are super in tune with the market, knowing winning strategies to give their clients a competitive advantage. Have amazing vendor referrals, are a one-stop shop for anything real estate, and just provide a ton of value for their clients. Howard and his partner, Kyle Draper, are UCLA alums and a huge fans of the UCLA football and basketball programs. You will often see them at games, tailgating and networking, and staying involved with the UCLA alumni community. They would love to help any fellow alumni with accomplishing their real estate goals. So if you guys have any real estate needs in the LA area, look no further. Howard is your guy. All right, guys, we're going to go into the episode. Man, what is up? It is a Thursday evening here in the great city of Los Angeles. Will Decker, your host, and the co-host to my right, the man, the myth, the legend, my best bud, Mr. Madman in the building. How are we doing on this Thursday evening, knowing that football is next Saturday for UCLA Bruins? We got college football starting this Saturday with the Dublin game. Unbelievable stuff, bro.
Thriller, can you believe it? I mean, from your mouth to God's ears, we got UCLA football next Saturday. I mean, we are a mere 8 days away from the kickoff to the new season. We cannot wait. Thriller, always such a privilege and an honor to be able to do this with you. And so excited to get into a really fun episode. It's been a great Thursday evening, and now it's going to be even better because we talk about our beloved Bruins.
Man, 8 days away. It feels like Christmas morning, like, when you're like leading up to Christmas Day. It's finally Christmas break. 8 sleeps away from college football. It cannot come soon enough. And we thought a fun kind of thing to cook up for this week before we jump into game week next week would be, what are the ceiling of the notable star-like players for UCLA as we head into 2024? What is the mountaintop that they can climb in their personal quest to maybe make some all Big Ten teams, maybe to break some UCLA records, maybe just to be able to get drafted at the end of the day? And we cooked it up. We got 6 or 7 guys we really like on this football team. And we're going to talk about the ceiling of these guys, Madman. How did we prepare for this podcast, Madman, as we're jumping into the ceilings?
Oh, I mean, you got to look at, who are the notable guys that we expect to be on this team making huge contributions here in this 2024 season? And then B, what is it about this season? Is it a regiment from last year? Is it some level of understanding and improvement? Is it a venue change? Is it a coaching change? Is it just sort of an understanding and a comfort with the speed and the pace and the schematics of college football? So looking at it from those lenses, Will, of who's going to make a big impact and why. And I think we've got some really good ideas here and some great players to break down.
Yes, we do. And I think the first place to start, it's QB1. It's Ethan Garbers. And I really thought long and hard about this. The ceiling for Ethan Garbers, and I'll put it to you this way. I think this guy, and there may be better quarterbacks within the entire Big Ten, probably a few guys that might get drafted higher than Ethan Garbers at the end of the day when they take that next step to the NFL. But I think the ceiling for Ethan Garbers in 2024 is he could lead the Big Ten in passing yards.
Wow.
I just think that's a real thing when you really evaluate everything that's going on there, because when you break down the Will Howards and the Dillon Gabriels, kind of the two guys that everyone's talking about when it comes to the conference, they're the Ohio State and Oregon respectively. These guys are going to be blowing out some of these teams that they're playing. So the need for passing the football is kind of going to be taken away from them early. Not to mention Will Howard has the best running back room in the entire country. The only guy I can really talk myself out of when it comes to Ethan Garbers, maybe leading the conference in passing yards, is the guy across town in Miller Moss with the weapons that he has out there, the style of play that Lincoln Riley has put out there for the quarterback room. I don't think he could be all Big Ten first team, but I think there's a scenario if he crushes it statistically, like we know, maybe gets them to 7-8 win ceiling like we talked about with the overall football team. Can he be all Big Ten quarterback number 2? What do you think about Ethan Garbers' ceiling and where are you at with it?
Will, we're talking ceiling here. So we're talking about what is the absolute max potential, and I absolutely love the take. And I think let's double click on some of the fascinating things that you said. Number one, let's talk about kind of the perennial guys that you think maybe are in front of him, right? And so let's start with Will Howard. To your point, Will, he's got the 2 best running backs in the country in the same backfield. Second, he's on a powerhouse team that's going to blow out a lot of people early and often in the season. Number 3, he himself is kind of a running quarterback as well. So he's going to be sort of taking reps away from himself when he is on those RPOs, when he's on those scrambles, when he's on those keepers. So there's totally a world here where Will Howard could dominate this season, and I think many expect him to, but it may not show up in the same way statistically because of usage rate. So I completely agree there. Then when you look at Dillon Gabriel, obviously he doesn't have quite the same level of weapons that Will Howard has, still exceptional weapons, and he's such a veteran of the game of college football. But I think the big knock, Will, on Dillon Gabriel over the years has been when he has a bad game, when he has an off game, it tends to snowball into 2, 3, and 4 games, right? It's hard for Dillon Gabriel to have a bad game and then just sort of bounce back and then get on that new win streak. So if that happens again this year and he has kind of an off night and it sort of plateaus his season, it kind of derails his season, that leaves the door open as well. Then when you talk about Miller Moss, Will, obviously on paper, the Lincoln Riley system, all the NFL quarterbacks that he's produced. So on paper, it feels like it's going to be a big year. But 2 question marks right now with USC. One is a lot of great athletes on the offensive line, but still a little raw, still a little unproven. Is Miller Moss going to have the time that he needs to get the ball off? Because he's not the athlete that the likes of Caleb Williams and Kyler Murray and Baker and Jalen Hurts are. And number 2, USC's receiving core, albeit stacked from a talent perspective, is still very inexperienced. They lost their top 2 receivers statistically last year. So guys are going to have to step up. So there may be some growing pains the first 3, 4, 5 weeks of the season that could potentially impact Miller Moss's stats. And then Drew Allar of Penn State, Will, I just don't know if he's going to throw the ball enough. You know, Penn State is still very much of a balanced team. They like to run the ball. They like to slow the tempo. So when you start breaking that down and saying there's some structural challenges there with these 4 quarterbacks, and then you throw in an Eric Bieniemy offense where you're not running the ball that much, to your point, Will, you're not really going to have that 1,000-yard back. It's going to be that basketball on grass, that old school Joe Tiller, Drew Brees type of offense, early 2000s with Purdue. You're going to throw a lot of balls. There's a world here. All Big Ten second team, all Big Ten third team. Absolutely. Ethan Garbers, if it all clicks and everybody stays healthy and that offensive line stays healthy, we are headed for perhaps an all Big Ten second or third team selection.
And just some of the other guys you mentioned, man, like, you know, Drew Allar, he's kind of got the poor man's Ohio State backfield with Nick Singleton and Katron Allen coming out of the backfield, 2 very talented running backs in Happy Valley. And you made the point, man, Bieniemy, he's going to attack the strength of this team. What is the strength of this team moving forward is the passing attack with that wide receiver room that runs about 6-7 deep, and Ethan Garbers returning after a very, very promising year. Nobody threw the ball more in the NFL last year than the Eric Bieniemy-led Commanders. He had Mahomes, Kelsey, and Tyreek Hill back when he was with the Chiefs. That team was artistic when they threw the football. This is just what they do. And with Eric Bieniemy's offense and Garbers in place, I just think he's going to put up monster numbers this year because they're going to be in a lot of close games. Give me Ethan Garbers for that ceiling. That is, if everything goes perfectly,
absolutely,
second team All Big Ten, maybe threatening to lead the conference in passing yards when it comes down to it for our guy Ethan Garbers. All right, second person we're going to go to. And maybe I'm more bullish on this. I know we put the hype train in up to the freaking moon last year when it came to this guy out of spring football. J.Michael, I think that's where we got to go. J.Michael Sturdivant. And Madman, I did some investigation because the kind of the rub on the outside coming into a Big Ten conference is Ohio State, very explosive offense. Outside of that, there's just not a great offense you can hang your hat on within the Big Ten. And, last year they had Marvin Harrison as the first team All Big Ten wide receiver. He was the second wide receiver on the All Big Ten team. It was Isaiah Williams from Illinois. I'll give you the stat line. 82 catches, 1,055 yards, and 5 touchdowns. That is the first team all wide receiver in the Big Ten, number 2 only behind Marvin Harrison Jr. If J.Michael is the guy we think he can be, I don't think he's going to threaten 80-plus catches next year. But if you ask me if he's got a realistic chance of exceeding 1,055 yards and 5 touchdowns, I'd say easy. I'd say he's got a shot at getting 1,200 yards next year, 7, 8, 9. Who knows? Maybe even double-digit touchdowns with how explosive he is on the outside. You remember, this guy was one of the premier track stars in high school in Texas. Can this guy, if everything goes right for UCLA in this offense, and he becomes the Tyreek Hill of this offense for UCLA with Eric Bieniemy leading the charge, can he be first team All Big Ten?
100%. I loved everything that you said because, Will, let's talk about that stat line for a second. 82 catches. Catches isn't really kind of the home run stat, right? You
Sure.
really sort of define a wide receiver in terms of these types of awards, these types of accolades. You got to have the yards. You got to have the touchdowns. When you talk about 1,055 yards and 5 touchdowns, look, J.Michael, if you take his first game against Coastal Carolina and you take the last game in the LA Bowl and you just sort of combine those stats, that's about 400 yards and 3 or 4 touchdowns right there. So if you're in a world where we're talking ceiling, where if he's kind of playing close to an A minus, B plus game every game for 12 games, you're talking about a guy that's going to get 1,200 yards and 10 touchdowns. I mean, you're talking about a guy who's going to threaten for 100 yards receiving every game and threaten for a touchdown every game because he's that big, he's that fast, he's that quick, he separates that easily, he's that elite an athlete. And so to me, the ceiling here, Will, you're spot on, is absolutely first team Big Ten. I think the correlation goes hand in hand. The success of Garbers is going to translate into the success of J.Michael. The success of the offensive line is going to translate into the success of J.Michael because last year was not statistically an accurate representation of his dominance. He was able to separate every game. It's just that in the first game and the last game, we had quarterbacks that were comfortable in their own skin and an offensive line that was able to provide pass protection to be able to get him the ball. You recall that game against Utah last year, Will, where he broke a few times and Dante missed him a few times. I mean, he was separating every game. You remember the Oregon State game? He separated a few times in that game. We just couldn't get him the ball. You remember the Colorado game? He separated a few times. We just couldn't get him the ball. So the ceiling here is that he's able to have an A game, A minus, B plus game. The offensive line has been able to do their job. This is 1,200 yards and 10 touchdowns, no problem. This guy, if all hits, Will, is a first-round NFL draft pick at receiver if it all comes together. So I absolutely love the take.
And, man, let's just say hypothetically, Ethan Garbers locks in to J.Michael Sturdivant the way that Jake Bobo was locked in on when it came to Dorian Thompson-Robinson.
Yes.
This is a situation where if he's targeting him on every big play and he's making catches like that, he's more explosive of an athlete than Jake Bobo will ever dream to be. And I love Jake Bobo. Jake Bobo was a dog. He made the Seahawks as an undrafted free agent. Like, I love that dude. If he locks on to J.Mike, kind of like how Mahomes locked in on Tyreek Hill, my goodness, I think the Big Ten is in for a treat with what this could potentially be because, I'm bullish on what Garbers can be. I'm bullish on what Sturdivant can be. And as we've talked about, the biggest thing for, Sturdivant that might be going, it may not even be the quarterback connection because I believe in that wholeheartedly. It's can the offensive line provide enough time for him to get open because he is a deep threat. It's going to take him 2-3 seconds to get those deep shots that he is so good at in getting open down the field. So the only two receivers I have completely ahead of him as it starts right now is Tez Johnson from Oregon, 1,000-yard plus receiver, 10 touchdowns. I got to give him his due. And Emeka Egbuka, who, had 1,000-yard plus season in the last CJ Stroud year there, kind of tailed off this past year, but Kyle McCord, not the greatest Buckeyes quarterback, as a lot of people in Columbus can tell you. I mean, those are the only two guys I can really think that are definitively, as it stands today, maybe better receivers in the college game than J-Mike. J-Mike's going to wake the world up this year. I'm very, very excited to see where it's going. So we've gotten through two of those. We got Garbers could potentially lead the Big Ten in passing yards. And hey, J-Mike could be all Big Ten first team if everything goes correctly, everything goes perfectly. These are not predictions. These are ceilings for what these guys can be in 2024. The next guys I've got up for you, I'm going to combine them both. And
I had a feeling you would. I had a feeling you would.
Exactly. These guys, I think we were a lot more higher on when we, we're thinking of the Chip Kelly like offense that was here in past 4 or 5 years in Westwood. You've got, TJ Harden and you've got Keegan Jones. I think combining both these guys is great. TJ, I thought in a Chip Kelly-like system is 1,100-yard, 1,200-yard rusher, even in with the Big Ten. Keegan is a guy that I actually think is going to have a bigger role. He might even be running back one as it stands right now in an Eric Bieniemy offense. What are the ceilings for both of these guys as we head into the Big Ten? I've got some thoughts on it, but I want to hear what you got to say about our running back room.
Yeah, Will, it's a really great point. I think my sense of ceiling for TJ Harden would have been completely different if Chip Kelly was still the coach as opposed to Deshaun Foster and Eric Bieniemy as his COO. I think the challenge here is exactly what we talked about earlier. Because of that Bieniemy offense where he's going to prioritize the short passing game over the run game, touches are going to be few and far between. And Harden is one of those guys, right? It's kind of fitting that his last name is Harden because he reminds me of another Harden in the NBA, James Harden, because from the perspective of he needs touches to get going. He needs touches to get more in the flow of the game. Just the way James Harden needs the ball in his hands more. He's got to dribble more to kind of feel more alive, get more in his moves, make the right play. Harden needs carries. And we've talked a lot about this. He's not a guy that you can just drop into the system and say, okay, if I give him 2 touches, he's going to break one. It's more, hey, he needs reps. He needs to lather up. He needs to kind of get a flow of the game. And then that 5th, 6th, 7th carry, he's going to sort of pop one and really sort of impose his will. Now, the question is he going to get enough consistency of touches to ever really feel like he's in the flow of the game? And I think that's my concern about his ceiling for this season. Now, having said that, if we're talking about absolute ceiling, I think there's a world here, Will, when we get into the second half of October, when we get into November, when we get into early December, you're talking about now venues for the first time, big crowds, bad weather, the unknown. I think there's a world here still potentially where in some of these games that you're going to lean on a TJ Harden to get you that 100, 125 yards. And there could be 3 games where you lean on TJ to get you 125 yards. And then all the other games, he's sort of hovering in that, 40, 50 yards per game. So to me, the overall ceiling for TJ Harden would be something along the lines of 750 yards and perhaps 8 to 10 touchdowns. Whereas if Chip Kelly were still the coach, I would tell you the ceiling is 1,300 yards, and 12 to 15 touchdowns, because he was going to be the primary bell cow. He was going to get 20 plus carries a game, really get into things like James Harden would in the NBA. Now, for Keegan Jones, if we sort of flip the dice here, the absolute ceiling for Keegan Jones is sort of like a Marshall Faulk of this offense. Okay. The absolute ceiling for Keegan Jones is 1,000 yards all purpose, 500 rushing, 500 receiving, because Keegan Jones is that guy where he only needs 2 or 3 touches and he can pop a few. I mean, remember the games that we saw last year, right? Where he wasn't getting enough touches. But then, remember that Washington State game? He had 3 carries the whole game, and 2 of them went for touchdowns on the same play. That's the kind of back that Bieniemy loves, where I don't have to give you a lot of touches, but you can make something happen because you're a dynamo, because you're a speedster, because you're a great athlete. And then when you couple that with the fact that he's such a great weapon out of the backfield receiving the ball, and if you have some questions of the offensive line and you want to do this sort of short passing game, who are you going to go to primarily, right? A short passing game is predicated on the tight end as well as on the running back. So if all hits, if everything sort of breaks right for Keegan, I actually see him getting 1,000 total yards of offense this season, but just 500 receiving, 500 rushing.
I think those are great points. And I had a very similar aligning points with both those guys. With Keegan, I think for me personally, his ceiling is kind of like you alluded to, kind of the key that opens up all the doors of this offense, where it's 1st and 10. We've been moving the ball, passing. He gets 6 yards on first down. It's like, okay, we got to play the run. And right when they start playing the run, they open up the play action, J.Michael 50-yard touchdown bomb, or big, hit over the middle to Rico Flores or Logan Lawyer, whoever it may be. If he can kind of be that stalwart, even just what Darrell Williams was for the Chiefs, or Damian Williams was for that matter with the Chiefs, this guy can really unlock the entire offense. And I think his ceiling for me is kind of still an undrafted free agent guy that can make a roster if he can get to that point. The Big Ten is just so loaded with running backs, and it's kind of their bread and butter with these offensive lines and the play style. Donavyn Edwards and Travion Henderson and Judkins and the 2 Penn State backs we just mentioned. I'd put all those guys, on the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd all Big Ten teams as it stands right now. And there's probably some other guys we missed when it comes to the running back room. But what I can definitively say is Keegan Jones, outside of Garbers, there's a world where he's the most important player on offense for this team in terms of getting UCLA's football team to their ceiling and that offense to that ceiling. TJ Harden, I think the best case scenario for him is he has his moments, like you were saying, where it's late in the 4th quarter, we're running the ball, we don't feel the need to pass the football, we're trying to ice the game. He extends drives. He kind of does what we talked about with Keegan, like getting those 6-7 first down carries when it comes to the open field. And I think the best thing that I could say about TJ Harden, it may be a year later than we expected, but if he comes into next year's team where, the cupboard is significantly, emptier than it is this year with all the returning talent on offense, he might be the hallmark player going into 2025 with an unknown proven quarterback, a lot of new linemen, and a new receiving room that, Quasi Gilmer, Braden Pagan, maybe those are the guys that come in later, but he could be the returning star of the offense in 2025. Do you think that's a fair statement for both?
Absolutely, Will, because you got to look at the personnel around you, to your point. And he's walking now into a situation, super experienced quarterback, super experienced wide receiver room. I mean, for God's sakes, the leading receiver on the team last year is wide receiver 4 right now. And so he's kind of in a situation where, and the coach knows that, the offensive coordinator knows that, and the experience levels are in the positions that the offensive coordinator likes. He's known for his passing game, so he's got to take a step back. Next year, who's the quarterback? Is it Luke Duncan? Keegan Jones has moved on. You're looking at a situation where J.Michael, Loya, have moved on. Maybe Flores is still there, and then you got to replace the other spot with Gilmer or Pagan. So a lot of more inexperience, less depth. You need the ball more. So I think if he kind of waits his turn, next year could be that year that Harden blows up and then uses that as an opportunity and a stepping stone and a jumping off point to go to the NFL.
Yeah, I think both those guys, if they can just contribute, and maybe not the ways they expected within a Chip Kelly offense, can really make the difference when it comes to UCLA this year and getting to the heights that they, are determined to get to as we approach the first game of the season. Toia And I'll tell you why I like Jay Toia. One of the most talented interior players we've seen at UCLA in a long time. You know, they had Otito Obonya and Osa Odigizua. They've had guys in the middle. And I think Toia is a part of that, lineage, a guy that will get drafted in the NFL. The problem with this is Big Ten defenses. It's like strap your chin straps up. This is a hell of a defense, man. Just a lot of stuff we can do. You've got Mason Graham, the guy that wanted to come to UCLA, but is at Michigan right now. Made the stop on Jalen Milroe at the Rose Bowl, one of the most iconic college football games we've had in the last decade. Kenneth Grant's right next to him, was maybe a day 1, day 2 pick in the NFL draft. And you got Tyleek Williams at Ohio State, who 84.2 PFF grade last year. Ohio State, they, manned up in the trenches after kind of getting bully balled by Michigan these past few years. So this is a tight group. My ceiling for Toia, for as talented as he is, we knew Texas wanted to get this guy for, medium 6-figure number. Some of the other big name schools were calling this guy's name. Toia, second team All Big Ten, maybe the 4th best Big Ten interior lineman, which is no, slight to him in any which way. I just think Jay Toia, if you really put him at his ceiling, is a guy that's competing for the second team All Big Ten and maybe be a day 2 pick in the NFL. I think it's Jay Toia's ceiling, brother.
No question about it, Will. And I think I love what you said there. Look, interior defensive line is one of the key stalwart positions in the Big Ten Conference. So, really hard to be kind of first team All Big Ten. You're talking about a top 10 NFL pick at that point, and which Toia could very well be. Even an All Big Ten second team, you're talking about a first or second round pick in many years. So to me, I completely agree with you. It's sort of similar to Garbers, where can he kind of crack that All Big Ten second team, All Big Ten third team? I think this in many ways, Will, is sort of the Toia. It's the coming out party. It's the season where it all comes together. Because if we sort of rewind the clock a little bit, Toia struggled, over the course of his college career, not just with on the field play, but just sort of some off the field maturity, finding himself, getting to the right sort of mental frame of mind to perform at an optimal level, right? He was initially recruited by SC, came to UCLA. There were a little bit of dust ups there in terms of kind of hopping between schools. Then, if we all recall that iconic Victory Bell game of 2022, he gets hurt in that game. I mean, that's sort of the unsung conversation there, Will. Like, how many 3rd and short and 4th and shorts did Caleb Williams have in that game? And if Toia is in that game, does it even need to come down to that final possession? UCLA could have beaten USC if Toia was there. That's how much of an impact he made. And I think last year we saw a scratching of the surface, but he was sort of overshadowed, of course, by the likes of Leatu, by the Murphy twins. The Danton Lynn system predicated a little bit more sort of end-to-end explosiveness, more sort of horizontal play from a defensive standpoint. Now he comes in, most presumably his last season of eligibility, and now he can sort of step into a leading role, a leadership role, both on the field as well as off the field. I think this is where it all comes together, Will. I think this is a year where you're looking at a guy who's putting together 35 to 40 tackles. You're looking at a guy who potentially could go kind of 5-5. Have 5 sacks as an interior defensive lineman and 5 tackles for loss, and really put together that complete body of work. Because if you look at his statistics historically over the course of his college career, he's had a great game. He's had a great couple of drives, a great few quarters, but he hasn't really put together a whole season. This is, I think, that year, when you sort of go to In-N-Out and you say, give me the double-double, I'm saying, hey, man, give me the double nickel, with Jay Toia. Give me my 5 sacks. Give me my 5 TFLs. I think that's where this is going.
Man, I love it. And this makes me want to get In-N-Out right after this podcast is complete. We may have to go to In-N-Out very, very soon. But I love the Toia pick. I just think he's going to have plays, too, where he's taking on 2 guys and either like Kane Madrano or Olufemi Oladeja come up and make a tackle for a loss. And even though those guys are really credited for the tackle, it's like, no, it's because Toia kind of opened those lanes. Like if you watch film, you understand, how big one of these like nose tackles or defensive tackles. Aaron Donald gets this all the time with the Rams, where you watch the amount of pressure and presence he puts on an offensive line, where it makes it so much easier for your Ernest Jones or, your Von Millers back in the day or Leonard Floyd's to go in there and really kind of clean up and get the sack. They get the credit for it. But Aaron Donald was the guy that did like 90% of that for them. I think that's how Toia is going to be at his ceiling for this UCLA team, making plays. The stats are there. 5 sacks is a lot. I think I'm going to go with 3.5. But hey, man, if he gets to 5 sacks, everybody is happy at UCLA, and we love it. So Jay Toia, second team all Big Ten, making plays for this UCLA defense. And being the leader of this defense, I think, is the best scenario we've got for him. I've got Olufemi Oladeji out next, and I'll kind of put this out to you. I think when you think of the Big Ten, the linebacking units have been just outstanding, man. Like your Iowa rooms, Jay Higgins is this guy coming back where PFF had him 3rd in the entire country coming into the 2024 college football season. You got Jayshon Barham, who was like a PFF star for Michigan. Jeffrey Bossa at the University of Oregon coming back off of a career year where he was a PFF first-team All-American. I don't expect any of that for Olufemi Oladeji. I want to say that. But I think a successful campaign is kind of blending the two things that make Olufemi Oladeji a very special player. It's him being able to read the run game, so he's going to make a lot of tackles around there, maybe 60 to 70 tackles in that room, be the lead tackler within the UCLA defense. And because we need him with the pass rush, if he has 5 or 6 sacks in there, being just kind of a threat on the pass rush and against the run game on offense, being a guy that these offensive coordinators got to stay up a little extra later to prepare for. I think Olufemi Oladeji with a leading tackler, maybe even threatening to lead sacks on the team for UCLA, is a very, very successful year. Where do you have our guy Femi when it comes to his ceiling?
I love it, Will, and I love the pick. I mean, this guy, when you look at him, it's just sort of staggering as a physical specimen. I mean, you and I have been to a few spring camps and fall camps in a row now over the years. And if you recall, Will, last year when we were there together on the beautiful UCLA campus and DK Metcalf was, there, and you got an opportunity to take a picture with DK, and it was such a great moment there. But DK was standing next to Femi, and everyone sort of regards DK as one of the incredible physical specimens of the NFL, of any sport, of just life. It's just sort of incredible. But when you saw Femi stand next to DK, you kind of didn't know who was who. I mean, that's how much of a specimen Oladipo is. And so the sky is the absolute limit when we're talking about ceiling here, Will. And I think there's a couple of factors that you alluded to. One is, who is going to replace Latu and, the Murphy twins and Carl Jones in terms of edge production? I think it's still a work in progress. We thought it was going to be a Chempong. A Chempong is playing on the interior now in that sort of rotation with Toia and Keanu. We're looking and seeing that Medrano now might slide off of that linebacker position and play kind of more of a hybrid edge to sort of fortify setting the edge and bringing pressure around the edge. And so where does that leave Oladipo? Now you factor in the second piece, which is Darius Moasau's not there. And when we talk about Leatu Latu as the MVP of the UCLA Bruins last season, in many ways, Darius Moasau was probably co-MVP and right behind him, kind of the unsung hero of this team. So I think what's going to be really interesting is as folks kind of are trying to do more of an edge rush by committee, to your point, Will, I think the ceiling is it 75 tackles and 7 sacks? Or is it more 100+ tackles and 5 sacks? I think there's sort of one or two worlds where that goes. And I think a lot is going to depend on where the pass rush help is going to come. If we get Medrano doing his thing, we get some of these sort of guys that we think are more rotational pieces. If one of them kind of steps up, then I think we're in a world here where Oladipo can be that sideline-to-sideline guy, stuff the run, go all over the place. Look, Moasa was a 130-plus tackle guy year over year, so there's no reason Oladipo can't be 100-plus tackles. So I think his stat line is going to be very dependent on the pass rush. So I got him at 75 tackles, 7 sacks, or 100 tackles, 5 sacks, depending on what's around him, but it's going to be an absolutely monster year.
Yeah, and I mean, his previous career high was 69 tackles when he came from Cal. So, he kind of has the keys to the car when it comes to the linebacking room. So, Moasau's gone. He's the guy now. I know you got John Vaughn's back. We saw Medrano kind of experimenting as an edge rusher. I think Olufemi Oladeji is kind of the sideline-to-sideline linebacker, like you were saying, that's going to carry this defense throughout the season. So, I like it. 75 tackles. We're going to need him in some of those pass rush situations. If he can get to 7 sacks this year, my goodness, that is a huge year. Maybe he becomes a day 2 pick in the NFL draft. He was the guy. We talked about this at spring football practice where you're like, who's the guys that you think are going to get drafted? And I said J.Michael, I said Toia. And the other guy that I was pretty confident was Femi. Just the frame. I think if he blows it out the doors at a combine-like situation, I think he's going to be a star, in the college football game. Give me Femi in the linebacking room. So we like that. Last position group I'll go with, and I saved the best for last, as if you know.
Oh, I know where this is going.
The secondary, yeah. As we all know, to people that have listened to the show for years, I am always optimistic about the secondary. They're always breaking my heart. It's like a rom-com. It's a terrible rom-com with me in the secondary about it. But I feel confident in this group. These are 2, solid starters. I cannot put them in the top tier. Dude, I looked up the top, 8 projected, corners. 4 of them were in the Big Ten. Like 4 of the top 5 or 6 were Big Ten corners. Will Johnson may be the best player in the entire draft next year. Like Sauce Gardner, Derek Stingley. Remember having those conversations.
Absolutely.
Will Johnson might be that guy when it comes to the next draft. You got Sebastian Castro and these Iowa guys, they're very positional in how they develop people. It's the offensive line, it's tight ends. It's that secondary room, man. They're so good at those 3 position groups when it comes to a Kirk Ferentz-led team. You got Jabbar Muhammad, who we're very familiar with, was at Washington and transferred to Oregon. That's a tough transfer, too, by the way. If you're a Washington
We're getting into Kyle Ford territory now, Will, with that transfer,
Literally, yeah, transfer into the arch rival. The only thing that would make it funny is if you had to transfer back to Washington.
The Kyle Ford move right there, yeah.
And then Denzel Burke for Ohio State is right there. So, you have the upper echelon of corners. And even as optimistic as I am in this secondary group, I can't put them on the first or second team. What I can say is I think Jalen Davies is an above-average corner. And I think Kirkwood showed some flashes. We've talked about it, man. Balling out in that USC rivalry game, you see when they come back the next year, it was the best Dorian's ever played. Coming back after that 6-touchdown performance. Greg Dulcich balled out in that game, was, for my money, and I know the rest of the country may feel this way too, that actually watch college football. Greg Dulcich was the best tight end in college football in the 2022 season. I will stand on that. I'll do whatever it takes to get to that ceiling on that. And then when it comes to, what we've got going on, Kirkwood picked off the great Caleb Williams, the first pick in the entire draft. I'm watching Hard Knocks. I'm watching preseason football. This guy looks like a legit star when it comes to the football position, the quarterback position. So I think these guys can be top 10 corners within the conference, but I think that's as far as I'm going to go as being optimistic. What do you think about that prediction when it comes to those 2 guys?
No, I think that's totally fair, Will. This is an absolutely stacked position group. We talked about interior defensive line as possibly being, the bread and butter. I mean, corner year after year in the Big Ten is just absolutely staggering. So I don't know about any sort of postseason awards per se, but I think where we can kind of lean on is what type of player can they be if they're the best version of themselves? What type of statistics can they accrue if they're the best version of themselves? And I think to your point, Will, when you start with Devin Kirkwood, look, if everything hits, the mental, the physical, the emotional, the athletic, you're talking about another Richard Sherman type of player, right? I mean, it's sort of the big body corner that can get physical when he needs to, that's got kind of a great catch radius to deflect balls, even intercept balls, to your point with Caleb Williams. And he's got the momentum from the Victory Bell performance. And how many times we have seen this, you have said it so well, Dulcich, DTR, but you can go back. I mean, you can go back to Skip Hicks, Cade McNown, Brett Hundley, Jonathan Franklin. I mean, the momentum that you sort of get from being iconic in that game is very, very significant. So you wonder, did that light bulb moment go off for him? And if it does, you're talking about a Richard Sherman-esque type of presence, a guy that's going to bump and run you, maybe have a couple of interceptions, perhaps have a couple of sacks in terms of from a corner blitz perspective when you're not expecting it, and just sort of wreaking havoc and being kind of that physical specimen that's sort of complementing Femi on the back end, and you're sort of running around and causing all kinds of havoc. even potentially coming up and stopping a run every once in a while on, sort of a corner run blitz. So that is sort of the best version of Kirkwood if it all clicks. And then I think with Davies, I think what makes Davies very special, and we've seen this in flashes, are his ball skills. His ability to actually complete a play as a corner via interception. I mean, we saw it in the Sun Bowl a couple of years ago. We've seen elements where he's made interceptions, had pick sixes, had big runs. So to me, the best version of Davies, if you have a Kirkwood causing havoc on one side of the field, perhaps Davies gets more single coverage. Perhaps Davies gets more favorable matchups. And then you're looking at a season, does Davies have 5 interceptions this year? I mean, that's a very plausible type of number where he could lead UCLA in interceptions, be sort of a top 4, 5, 6 guy in the Big Ten in interceptions, and really make a name for himself moving forward. So I think the best version of Kirkwood is sort of Richard Sherman 2.0. And I think the best version of Davies is sort of a ball hawk that has the ability to get 5 picks this year.
Yeah, I was about to ask you after this concluded. Over under 2.5 interceptions for Jalen Davies. What are you taking on that?
Over.
I think I might take the over. Yeah.
Yes.
I'm taking the over. I think I'm taking the over as well. Well, dude, this was a lot of fun, and it just got me more excited. I didn't even know that was possible to get more excited for college football right around the corner. Guys, tune in. We're going to try to get someone from Hawaii to your game watching experience. So much love, guys. We will be back very
I'm going to say one thing before we go. Let's go a little crazy these last 30 seconds, okay? We've had so much fun. What happens if everybody we just talked about hits their ceiling? If everyone hits their ceiling, this is a playoff team. This is a top 8, top 4 team. This is a team that is threatening for, like, if Garbers is all Big Ten first team, if Femi is giving us 100 tackles, if Toia is double nickel, if Davies gives us 5 picks, Keegan goes for 500. J.Michael is a 1,200-yard receiver. Everyone hits their ceiling. It's like you're on a heater in Vegas. Everything you're putting down at the craps table is coming up money. If everyone does their thing, is this an 11-1 team that's going to the playoff with a shot at the Natty?
Oh man, even with that, man, I think we'll have to see how LSU is, right? Because that's the big question I think a lot of people have. You could talk me into it if they look bad against USC, because we beat that USC team last year with a lot of returning talent. You might be able to, and I know it's at, Death Valley, which is a very different situation, but you can maybe sway me if that defense was as bad as it was last year. Maybe there's something there. Oregon, there's no scenario where I could see it. I'm sorry. Oregon is just too good. Dillon Gabriel, I think, is going to be the all-time passing yards and touchdown leader when this ends. They didn't even need him, which was the crazy part. And you add a Dillon Gabriel to that Dan Lanning structure that he's building in Eugene. Penn State is the kind of the wild card, right? Like, they're a team that's been a fringe playoff team for a long time. A lot of people are out on Drew Aller. Let's say he makes a couple mistakes. Let's say Davies gets in there, maybe picks an early pass off. We're up 7-0 already at this point, right? We get momentum. We go down. We score. We're up 14. That's an exciting scenario to play out in your head, because that is not totally unrealistic, right?
We're just sort of having the fantasy of the season
thriller.
Fantasy. But the crazy thing is, if it all hits, let's say they can't beat LSU. Okay, Death Valley, it's too out there. Oregon is just too good. But is there a world if all of this hits? It's a 0.0001% chance of it happening, but that's the fun of being able to talk in the off season. Is there a world where they can run the table in every other game outside of those two? 10-2 probably in the Big Ten is going to get you into the playoff. I mean, is that where this goes?
I think 10, like, if everything is perfect, and like you said, it's the 1%. I think 10-2 is kind of where I would be at, because I think Oregon, I just don't see it. I was, upfront with that just a couple seconds ago. And then with USC, that's a toss-up. It's a coin flip. We know those guys. It's at the Rose Bowl. Nebraska is going to be tough, but they've got a true freshman starting. I mean, we saw it with Dante Moore, right? He's a 5-star. It was kind of the same stratosphere that this quarterback's in. I don't know. It's not insane. I was at home on a Friday night. We got to see a lot of improvement on their offense, Because, I mean, we're going to be putting up 21, 25 points in that game. I know how good their defense is, but Iowa's going to have to outscore us. Rutgers, good defense. I mean, it's kind of similar to Iowa, right? They've got a great running back, but if they're down early in that game and they have to, deviate, if you will, from a Kyle Monungai run game, what's that look like at Rutgers, right? We don't know what that looks like. It doesn't seem any different or, a lot worse than what we've seen from our Pac-12 days, right? So, you're not insane, man. I think that's a great way to put it. I think it's a great way to cap it off. Be optimistic about this year. I'm not saying have crazy expectations, but if that 0.1% hits, UCLA could be looking pretty this year, man. That's all I'm going to say on that front. Bruin Bible, we are officially out. We'll be back very soon. You guys have